Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Beautiful to be practicing with you today. My name is Dhammadipa, and we are here for the Tuesday tune-in, which means that our program is about 25 to 30 minutes of guided meditation, and then I'll offer a Dhamma talk, and we'll have some time for questions, answers, comments, reflections at the end. And usually I turn off the recording in time for the questions. But in the meantime, we'll have the recording on. Folks online can have their cameras on or off, whatever feels more comfortable for you. Please do keep your mics muted. And then we'll end the evening with a dedication of merit. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and do a practice called 4 Elements Meditation. And I'm going to try to offer very light guidance here. So it's mostly quiet, but just know that it is a meditation of scanning the body, moving the attention through the body, aware of what are said to be the 4 great elements. So earth, water, fire, and air. And those qualities. So I'll just mention what they are as we get to them. So for this moment, you can go ahead and begin to settle into your meditation posture. I like to begin with just a bit of movement, the head or torso. Just loosening up a bit and allowing the body to find a centered, upright posture. Relaxing the belly and really allowing the body to settle right here on your seat. Perhaps also allowing the muscles around the chest and the ribs to become soft and wide and relaxed. And softening the eyes. No need to strain at all. Now moving the attention to the crown of the head, knowing that every cell in the body contains the earth element, some solid matter. And just beginning to move the attention downward, slowly, slowly. Down through the neck, aware of earth as this body. Moving down the right shoulder, slowly down the right arm. Noticing the qualities of earth, stability, firmness. Arriving at the right hand and shifting to the left hand, completely pervaded by earth. And slowly up the left arm and left shoulder. Beginning to move down the torso. Just knowing the presence of earth. All the way down to the lower abdomen and the buttocks. And then down the right leg. Noticing the natural stability of earth as this body. On the right foot. Shifting to the top of the left leg. And moving the attention down toward the foot. Slowly aware of the presence of earth element. And finally arriving at the left foot, aware of earth. And now a shift, staying with the left foot, but shifting the awareness of water, water element in every cell of the body. The quality of softening and smoothing and cohesion, helping the earth to stay together, actually, like dough. So just going to allow you to move your attention at your own pace up through the body, aware of water pervading this body. Moving the attention up through the body, just knowing that there is water in every part of the body. Water as this body. And arriving at the crown of the head again. And a shift to awareness of the fire element, which represents heat, warmth, chemical reactions. And we know that there is warmth in every cell. So, again, moving at your own pace. Allowing the attention to touch each part of the body, aware of the quality of warmth of heat in the body. Still scanning the body downward. No need to strain to feel the fire element. Just knowing warmth as this body. And arriving at the left foot. One last element, the element of air. So again, we know that there is oxygen in every cell. The whole body pervaded by the air element. So just knowing that and scanning through the body, aware of the qualities of lightness and spaciousness, just observing as you go along. Continuing to move the attention upward through the body, aware of the presence of air. Finally, in these last few minutes of the meditation, now turning the attention outward to the air around you and above you, and knowing that that air has all four elements in it. Earth in the form of dust and pollen, water in the form of humidity, fire, some degree of warmth in the air, and the oxygen itself, air element. So the internal elements and the external elements are essentially the same. that completes our meditation practice for this evening. And there will be time for reflections or questions about that practice if you would like to do, if you have any of those later in the evening. And at this moment, I'm going to go ahead and transition into the Dharma talk. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. This evening, I want to talk a little bit about faith. And so the Pali word for this, that in the ancient Buddhist language of Pali, the word is saddha. Saddha. In Sanskrit, it's shraddha. And that's the other ancient Buddhist language that we're most familiar with. And translated as faith, or sometimes as trust or confidence. And those are three very different things in the English language: faith and trust and confidence, although they are related. But in particular, I want to talk about the dimension of faith, or to talk a little bit about what role faith might have in our practice. And I'm aware that faith is a difficult word for some people. That in fact, some people come to Buddhism because they've lost their faith in whatever other spiritual tradition they were raised in, or because they are interested in a practice or in something that doesn't require any kind of belief. And I think there's room for all of that, actually, on the path. And yet, it's also interesting and I think necessary to talk about this particular aspect. And so I want to also say that oftentimes this word faith brings up the meaning of belief in something that you can't prove. Yeah, or faith means belief or reliance on or appeal to the beneficence of some other being, the power or the benevolence of some other being. And that can be a difficult place for people. That can bring up a sense of vulnerability or a sense of powerlessness or a sense of rebellion or a sense of just wanting a little more certainty than that, or a little more sense of solidity and direct experience. And certainly Buddhism is about direct experience. It's one of the topics that I touch on quite frequently, but I thought today I would make a bit of a contrast and see if we can bring this together. Because it's, to me, the question that I am bringing forth this evening is something like, why is it that, given that Buddhism is very much a practice and a tradition about direct experience, then why is it that the Buddha himself named faith twice in the 37 factors or qualities that he said were helpful on the path of the discovery of the reality of all things? So they're called the 37 aids to enlightenment, or the 37 wings to awakening. And two of them are faith. So the 37 aids, I've touched on them a couple of times before, and you don't need to know them. In fact, I'm not sure that I could rattle them off right now if I had to. But they're grouped into different frameworks that the Buddha offered as supports for our practice. And faith shows up in two of those frameworks. So there are said to be the 5 faculties, 5 spiritual faculties, and the 5 spiritual powers. And faith is the first of both of those two things. So a faculty being something, we might understand that to mean something like a tool that we have, or a capacity that we have at our disposal. So we have some spiritual tools, and we have powers, the spiritual powers. And oftentimes people are tempted to say that because the list is exactly the same of those two things. So the 5 spiritual faculties are faith and effort and mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And the powers are exactly the same thing. And so that people are often tempted to say, well, the faculties, if we think of them as tools, are like before you're good at them, and then the powers are when you're good at them. But actually, we don't find any support for that at all in the historical texts. What we find is a teaching by the Buddha that they are the same thing. It's more a matter of how you're using them. They are the same qualities, and it's more a matter of how you relate to them or apply them in a given moment. So he thought it was important, faith. And the question then before us is, well, what kind of faith, or what is it that we are asked to have faith in? So if you look at the series of what are called the connected discourses, there's a whole chapter in the connected discourses that is about this particular framework, this framework of the 5 spiritual faculties. And he talks in various ways about them. And in this, so that's the 48th chapter, by the way, in case anybody's going to look it up. And it's one of those parts of the collections of the discourses that's quite messy. You can tell that they sort of compiled a bunch of things, some seemingly unrelated things together, by using this word indriya, which means, again, like a power or a faculty that one would have. But what we see in the description there is, first of all, described as faith in the Buddha, in the Tathagata. So the Buddha referred to himself as the Tathagata. What does that mean? It means, it can be translated as one who comes thus, or one who goes thus. It could be translated in either way. So what is it, one who comes thus? One who comes thus means what you see is what you get. This is he comes in complete harmony with the reality of all things. That's what the Tathagata means. That he is a demonstration, basically, an enlightened being is a demonstration of harmony with the truth of things. A deep knowing of that in a way that's clear and without any resistance to it. And then the goes thus is something like is the lack of resistance. It's the letting go. So the Tathagata is said to have let go of all of greed, hatred, and delusion. Anything that any kind of negative qualities of mind that might stand in the way of again, a clarity, absolute clarity about the nature of this life. And so to have faith in the Buddha is that we're asked to have faith in the Buddha as the one who is enlightened and who is unsurpassed teacher of the way of what? The way means the way of peace. So in Buddhism, we say that we are, the Buddha himself said, what I teach is the end of suffering. But interestingly, the end of suffering doesn't mean happiness. So when the Buddha says that the path is about coming to the end of dukkha, the end of unsatisfactoriness, it doesn't mean happiness. It actually means peace, rather than this dichotomy of suffering and pleasure, or pain and pleasure, right? Something that is completely peaceful beyond that duality or that dichotomy. And so the Buddha is a historical person. He was a human being. That's a very important part of his story, that he's not a deity. He's not, some alien from another realm. He was born a human being and went through quite a struggle that he describes in many of his discourses in order to find this wisdom. But even so, it can be hard to relate to this person from so long ago, and with all the stories and the miracles and the various things that are said about him. So, but looking at this way of relating to the Buddha, to say that one has faith in the Buddha as the enlightened one and as the one who is a teacher, the unexcelled teacher of the way of peace, to me that means that we accept the path of Buddhist practice as something different than any other modality of addressing the difficulties of our life. That's what it really means, that it's a unique approach to a spiritual life. It's a unique approach to a peaceful life. It's a unique approach to the cultivation of wisdom. Different than, say, psychology or psychiatry or philosophy or yoga or Hinduism or any other religion. It's different than all of those things. And so then the question before us is, well, how would you know, right? Because we don't have access to the Buddha. We're not going to sit down in front of the Buddha and receive a teaching. But the question is then, how would we know? And the Buddha said, of course, he said, listen and try it out. You listen and you try it out, and you see whether it brings a little bit of relief, or perhaps a lot of relief, from those difficulties, the greed, the hatred, and the delusion or confusion of your life. And this is a critical aspect of understanding what we mean by faith. Yeah, the Buddha doesn't say that the way to the path of peace is to believe his dogma. He says that the way to the path of peace is to try it out for yourself, to listen, to drink it in deeply, and try it out for yourself. And what that means is that the Dharma doesn't belong to him. It's not something that he owns, that he bestows on you, right? It's not like God sending you to heaven or whatever other belief system you might have. You might have that belief system, and that belief system is you could say, is not an impediment necessarily to your practice. And the Dharma itself is something that doesn't belong to any one person, including the Buddha himself. So we have this beautiful story of what is said to be the Buddha's first discourse after his awakening. So he woke up under what's now called the Bodhi tree. Bodhi means awakening there in India, northern India. And he spent 7 weeks in the bliss of awakening. So he had a 7-week vacation. Nice. Beautiful. And during that time, he sort of assessed who would be the next person to talk to about what he had learned, because he said, this Dharma that I have seen is very hard to understand. And so he decided to go back to the 5 seekers, spiritual seekers that had been practicing with him before his awakening, and talk to them, his buddies, his companions, about it. And in that process, he tells a little bit about not falling into extreme mortification or asceticism. He talks about not falling into kind of a life that is driven by wanting lots of luxuries or sense experiences. He talks about the 4 Noble Truths. And ultimately, what happens is about 2/3 of the way through this story, Kondanya was one of the 5 seekers. And Kondanya says, everything that is of the nature to arise is of the nature to cease. And he got it. He understood that even dukkha, even our difficulties, our greed, our hatred, our confusion is also of the nature to arise and to cease. That's the important part, that second half. And in that moment, there's this story in the sutta, whether you believe it or not, that's okay. But there's a part of the story there where it says the heavenly beings, like the angels, like spoke to each other and said, hey, did you hear? Did you hear Kondanya? He got it. He got it. And then Anya's name, Kondanya's name gets changed to Anya Kondanya. It's changed by the Buddha to Kondanya who knows for himself the wisdom of the teaching. And you could say that that is the first moment of transmission, of Dharma transmission, right there. That is the first moment in which the teaching of enlightenment becomes the heritage of all of humanity. Not just the heritage of one human being, but the heritage of all of humanity, that it can be passed on, that it was passed on, that it is still being passed on. So it's a beautiful moment, and it is, you could say that that's how compassion is also defined in Buddhism, this willingness to share the teachings. And then at the other end of the Buddha's life story, so at the time when he was dying, in the sutta which tells about the story of the last 3 months of the sutta's life, the Buddha's attendant Ananda says to him, oh, I'm so sad and worried that the Buddha is dying. But I feel that I can console myself because I'm sure that before he dies, the Buddha is going to say something special to us about the Sangha, about the community. And the Buddha says to Ananda, to his Venerable Ananda, his attendant, the Buddha says, I do not have a closed fist. I have given the whole Sangha all of the teachings. I have given you everything you need. There will not be any new teachings because I have already given you with an open hand the fullness of everything that you need to know. Everything that you need to know to have the same awakening that I had. And so he says to them this beautiful, beautiful phrase that comes down to us. And I want to read Maurice Walsh's translation. So now, Maurice Walsh's translation is probably the most easily available of the so-called Digha Nikaya, the long discourses. And this being one of them, the Discourse of the Buddha's Last Days is number 16 in the long discourses. And Maurice Walsh, this is an old translation. I don't know when he did it, but it's early, you could say, and you can tell by the language of it. But I love that sort of enthusiasm that he had, Maurice Walsh had, for these teachings, because there's exclamation points, even in the footnotes and stuff. He was just so excited by this. So anyway, this is Maurice Walsh's translation, and he says, Yes. So in any event, Venerable Ananda says, the Lord, this is one of the bits that I don't appreciate about Maurice Walsh's use of this. The Tathagata will not attain final nibbana until he has made some statement about the Sangha. But Ananda, what does the order of the Sangha expect of me? I have taught the Dhamma, making no inner and no outer. The Tathagata has no teacher's fist in respect to doctrines. He says, I am now old and worn out. He was 80 at the time. Just as an old cart is made to go by being held together with straps, so the Tathagata's body is kept going by being strapped up by, he says in the next sentence, by concentration, by going into these very profound concentration states. So maybe some of you feel like that. Your body is like falling apart and just barely held together. But then he gives this is the beautiful part. He says, therefore, Ananda, you should live as islands unto yourselves, being your own refuge, with no one else as your refuge, with the Dhamma as your island, with the Dhamma as your refuge, and no other refuge. So he turns us back to ourselves, to our own ability to discern. And so now you see the true beauty of the Dhamma, the true integrity of the Dhamma, that to put your faith in the Buddha is to have the Buddha put his faith back in you. He gives it back to us time and time again. You be the island. You take in the Dhamma and you practice the Dhamma and you will see. You will see for yourself. And how does a monk or a nun or a layman or a laywoman or a person of any gender or any human being practice? Then he gives us some specifics. But before that, I want to say, so maybe at this moment or in some other moment, you think, well, that was a long time ago. That was 2,600 years ago. Times are different. It doesn't really work like that, or those people were special, or you had to have access to the Buddha himself, or you might have any number of different ways of doubting it. In fact, I remember quite clearly my dear, dear, dear friend, Blanche Hartman, Venerable Blanche Hartman, who was the first woman abbot of San Francisco Zen Center many, many years ago. Blanche said to me, yeah, so when I first came to Zen Center, and Shunryu Suzuki Roshi was this little Japanese man who had come over from Japan, who was teaching people Zen, Japanese Zen. And I, came to hear his teaching, and I sat down in the room, and Roshi gave this teaching, like this, like you could practice the Dhamma, I could practice the Dhamma, she says. And she says, and I thought to myself in my head, oh, he doesn't know me. And she completely dismissed it. She said, it doesn't really apply to me. And then she says, Blanche says, 45 years or so later, she says, but then eventually I came to realize that, yes, that Roshi was right, that the Dhamma did apply to me, that I could see it in my life, that I could see it in myself, that I could see that I could walk this path. That became clear to me. And dear Blanche became the abbess, of course. So she definitely did see that the Dhamma was hers, was accessible to her. So just to continue a little bit here, and then I will open it up for questions and again sharing or reflections. So what is the teaching that the Buddha gave on that day in terms of how one would be an island to themselves, how one would be taking the Dhamma as their own practice. He says, well, here, a practitioner abides contemplating the body as a body, earnest, aware, mindful, having put away all kinds of hankering and fretting for the world. This is Maurice Walsh's beautiful way of talking about this. Having, in other words, having set aside wanting to be someplace else or doing something else, you come and you give yourself for some period of time, a moment, a day, a lifetime. And likewise, with regard to feeling tones, so the basic pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral tonalities of our lived experience. Likewise, the mind. So one abides contemplating the mind as the mind, earnestly, clear, aware, mindful. And mind objects are what we call dhammas, mind phenomena, the principles of reality. So what are these things that we are asked to practice with? Those are called the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or the 4 establishments of mindfulness. Mm-hmm. So again, body, feeling tones. So feeling tones perhaps being the most subtle one. So anytime we have any kind of a lived experience, we have like a pre-verbal or very, very kind of primitive, if you will, sense that it's okay or it's not okay, or we can't really tell. That's really what this feeling tone is. And the reason to become aware of that is because it helps us to, there's a reason it comes between, so body, feeling tones, mind, and then mind principles or principles of Dhamma. The reason why that comes in between body and mind is because the feeling tones arise with each point of contact, with each kind of experience that we have through the sense doors. So it helps to point us. It's like a little flag. It helps to point us to the relationship that the mind has to the body. The feeling tones are right there. And again, it can be kind of subtle, can be, it takes some practice to learn how to discern those tones as distinct from your thoughts or your perceptions about a thing, but the actual underlying gut feeling about it, if you will. So again, the 4 body, feeling tones, mind itself, mind as a phenomena, which is awareness and which has, you could say, certain, not states necessarily, but you could say certain kinds of characteristics. So we're asked to see, for example, whether the mind is spacious or contracted in a particular moment, or whether the mind is feeling greedy or generous in a particular moment. So there's these ways of looking at the mind. And then the more specific qualities, so the more specific principles or qualities would be things like the 7 factors of awakening, which we went through a few weeks back. Yeah. So these are things that are accessible to us. These 4 foundations of mindfulness are called the foundations or the establishments because they're the place where we practice. The body, the feelings, the mind, and the qualities of the mind, or principles at work in the mind. These are things that are right here at hand. So ultimately, wisdom is to know the truths of this body and mind, to know the reality of this body and mind, to know the Dhamma of this body and mind as our refuge. And when that happens, then we see that faith comes to balance wisdom, that our faith is actually ultimately not just a faith in some person from many, many years ago, But it is a faith that even the things that are described that we've never experienced are possible. We have at least opened the door to that. That we are willing to investigate as far as our experience and our eye of practice can see. And we hold some degree of faith and confidence in ourselves based on the confidence that we have from the Buddha and from all the people who have shared the Dhamma over the centuries, that more is possible, that the absolute peace of knowing reality is a door that could open right here for us, just as much as it opened for them. If we are willing to bring ourselves to that practice, if we are willing to be our own refuge, to be our own friends on the path, actually. So faith becomes wisdom, and wisdom becomes faith. And in the end, we are all so fortunate to have received this beautiful inheritance, this beautiful legacy that has been given to humanity to have this path, to try it out, to see for ourselves. What are the truths of our lives? Thank you.